It is a very great pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Edward Kessler, MBE, to give the sermon this morning. Edward, as some of you may know, grew up here at the LJS and is founder-president of the Wolf Institute in Cambridge, which focuses on teaching, scholarship, and outreach in the Abrahamic faiths, encouraging tolerance and fostering understanding between people of all beliefs. Ed is a leading thinker in interfaith relations and has written or edited 12 books, including Challenges in Jewish-Christian Relations, An Introduction to Jewish-Christian Relations, and Jews, Christians, and Muslims in Encounter. His 13th book, A Documentary History of Jewish-Christian Relations from Ancient Times to the Present Day, which he edited with Neil Wenborn, is, I think, published today, 31st, and it is a mere £95, I think. We'll get it for the library, for sure. In June, Ed was awarded the 2024 Salisbury Prize by the International Council of Christians and Jews and the Center for Intercultural Theology and Religions at the University of Salzburg, honoring the major role he has played through his scholarship and teaching in advancing the rapprochement between Jews and Christians. He is, as we've advertised, the chair of the advisory committee that is overseeing bringing liberal Judaism and Reform Judaism together, a role that I imagine demands robust leadership combined with profound sensitivity. Ed has both these qualities, and there is much more to say. But without more ado, let me welcome you, Ed, in our traditional way and say to you, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, berachnuchem mibeit Adonai. Blessed are you and your family who come in the name of the Eternal One. We bless you from the house of the Eternal One.
Thank you, Alex. The loop isn't working, so I shall speak even louder than I normally do. But thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back at the family synagogue and to be here with friends and family. And I want to begin with a story about a Cambridge lecturer who was invited to deliver a talk in Beijing. Not knowing Mandarin, he was provided with an interpreter. He began his lecture, and after a sentence or two, he stopped in order for the translator to translate. But the translator waved him on and said, carry on, I'll tell you when to stop. So he carried on, uninterrupted, for about 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, the Chinese interpreter turned to the audience and said 7 words in Mandarin. 7 words. And then said, carry on, and he speaks again for another 15 minutes, and at the end of it, the translator says 7 words. The same thing happened after 45 minutes, and at the end, the translator gives 3 words in Mandarin. As the audience files out, the lecturer turns to the Chinese interpreter and says, that was unbelievable. I gave the most complicated lecture on religion, and you compressed it into a few words. What did you say? And the translator said, well, that was easy. After 15 minutes, I said, so far, he hasn't said anything new. And after 30 minutes, I said, he's still not said anything new. And after 45 minutes, I said, I don't think he's going to say anything new. And at the end, I said, I was right. Now, the question is, can we say anything new, even radically new, about a religious tradition whose history covers 3/4 of the entire history of human civilization? Can we say anything new about Judaism? Well, it just so happens that this Torah portion shows we can. Our parasha has inspired initiatives such as Make Poverty History,
to reduce or in some cases cancel the burden of debt borne by many developing countries. They are based explicitly on the commandment to open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, to the poor in the land. In our passage, beautifully read by Andrea, slaves are to be freed in the sabbatical year, debts are to be cancelled. Rarely has an ancient idea more effectively proved its relevance in the contemporary world. Concern for economic justice, debt relief, and humane working conditions speaks with undiminished power to the problems of a global economy. It is a glorious idea, the relevance of which lies in the fact that even today it inspires politicians, economists, and religious leaders far beyond our own Jewish community. Poverty creates the need for loans, and the burden of debt can become cumulative and crippling, leading many people to sell even their freedom. In ancient times, this meant selling oneself into slavery. Today, it means domestic servitude and sweatshop labor at less than subsistent wages. The logic of the sabbatical, like the more substantial jubilee, demands periodic redistribution, the cancellation of debts and the liberation of slaves. In Judaism, especially in progressive Judaism, the state exists to serve the individual, not the individual, the state. Of course, a few weeks after the general election, I'm not claiming that there's a direct line between the Torah and contemporary politics. But Jews have identified with all shades of political spectrum, from Leon Trotsky to Milton Friedman, from socialism and communism to neoconservatism and laissez-faire capitalism. The Torah is not an economic theory or a party political program. It's about long-term, not short-term change, setting the parameters of a society based on the eternal values of equality and freedom. Our Torah portion commends that the governance of society be based on moral considerations above all the dignity of the individual. And that's what the rejection of slavery entails. It emphasizes human dignity so that no one must suffer the humiliating poverty. No members of the community must be condemned to perennial slavery or debt or the burden of interest repayments. But beyond the halachic parameters is the larger ethical vision of what a decent society should look like. This does not cease to be compelling in an age of international incorporations, instantaneous communication, a global economy, and fears of another economic crisis. Ultimately, we learn from our parashah that you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore, I command you this today. Precisely because ownership is vested in God, what we possess we merely hold as God's trustees. One of the conditions of that trust is that we do not use wealth or power in ways incompatible with human dignity. This is the concept that leads to the creation of a just society and the release of slaves. Our Torah portion makes it clear that slavery is wrong. It's an assault on the human condition. To be in the image of God is to be summoned to a life of freedom. But let me share something else with you. Not being slaves to anyone else was radical, even revolutionary in terms of overturning the foundations of religion in ancient times. The early civilizations of Mesopotamia, of Egypt, were based on hierarchies of power, which seemed to adhere to the very nature of the cosmos. Religious rituals and the building of monuments, such as the pyramids, were designed to endorse those hierarchies. In this respect, Karl Marx was right. Religion in antiquity was the robe of sanctity, concealing the naked brutality of power. At the heart of this week's Torah portion is an idea almost unthinkable to the ancient mind. That God intervenes to liberate slaves, that the supreme power is on the side of the powerless and the vulnerable. It's no accident that the history of that Israel was born as a nation under conditions of slavery, carrying throughout its history the memory of those years. The exodus from Egypt serves as an eternal reminder to all of us of the moral necessity of freedom and vigilance that's needed to protect it. The free God requires the free worship of free human beings. Yet, the Torah does not abolish slavery. Yes, it was limited and humanized. Every seventh day, slaves were granted rest and the taste of freedom. And as we read, in the seventh year, Israelite slaves were set free. If they chose otherwise, they were released in the Jubilee year. And during their years of services, they were due to be treated like employees. They were not to be subjected to back-breaking or spirit-crushing labor. Everything dehumanizing about slavery was forbidden. Yet, slavery was not banned. Why not? It was wrong. It should have been annulled. Why did the Torah allow a fundamentally flawed institution to continue? We find guidance from Moses Maimonides, the great medieval Jewish philosopher, who explained the need for time in the transformation of society. All processes in nature, he argued, are gradual. The fetus develops slowly in the womb. Stage by stage, a child becomes mature. And what applies to individuals applies to nations and civilizations. God did not ask of the Israelites that they suddenly abandon everything. God refrained from prescribing what the people, by their natural disposition, would be incapable of obeying, he wrote in Guide for the Perplexed. But we might ask, surely God can do anything, including changing human nature. Why then did not God simply transform the Israelites, making them capable immediately of the highest virtue? Maimonides' answer is simple. If it were part of God's will to change the nature of any person, the Torah would have been superfluous, and the free worship of free human beings would have been rendered null and void. There is no greatness in programming a robot to obey instructions. God's greatness lay in taking the risk of creating a being, man and woman, capable of choice and responsibility. God wanted humanity to abolish slavery, but by their own choice. And that takes time. Ancient economies were dependent on slavery, and slavery was not abolished in Britain and America until the 19th century, and in the US, not without a civil war. The question was, how could one create a social structure in which, of their own accord, people would eventually come to see slavery as wrong and freely choose to abandon it? The Torah's answer lay in a single stroke to change slavery from an ontological condition, what am I, to a temporary circumstance. The entire complex of biblical legislation is designed to ensure that neither the slave nor his owner should ever see slavery as a permanent condition. The Torah did not abolish slavery, but it set in motion a process that led people to conclude that it was wrong, and slavery was eventually abolished. And this brings me to another lesson from today's Torah portion, the relationship between the neighbor, and the stranger. Although the Torah commands us in one place, in Leviticus 19:18, to love our neighbor, it says on 36 separate occasions we are commanded to love the stranger. This is what we are meant to have learned from the experience of exile and suffering in Egypt, of being strangers. The Israelites were oppressed. Therefore, they knew how it feels to be a stranger. They were not to inflict on others what was once inflicted on them. Sadly, in the state of Israel today, there are too many examples of this lesson not being heeded. The Torah teaches us that minority rights are the best test of a just society. This is the society we progressive Jews seek to create, a society that respects the whole, especially the powerless. I understood how badly the world needed this truth a few years ago when I spoke to the World Council of Churches in Geneva at a gathering of leaders from different faiths. Can you imagine? 200 religious leaders at a gathering modestly entitled the Multi-Faith Peace Summit. You get 200 religious leaders together and you expect peace? I discovered religious leaders can give sermons, but they can't take them. Anyway, I sat through many wonderful speeches, all of which said the same thing: peace is great. Our religion believes in peace. Therefore, all you have to do is to become like us. And that's a problem. Because peace is what we make with people who aren't like us, who will never be like us, have no reason to be like us. And this is what Judaism teaches. Too much of human history has been written in the blood of human victims who, because they were not like them, who didn't live like them, who didn't share their faith, were regarded by them as infidels, the unredeemed, the subhuman. And that's why the single most important statement in the rabbinic tradition is the teaching that when a human being makes coins, the mold means they all come out the same. But when God makes every human being in God's image, they all come out different. And that's why each human being, each culture is a universe. And it's our task to respect differences while being true to our own, while making space for people who are different. In a couple of weeks, we will be wishing each other L'Shana Tova, a happy new year. But let me end with a thought that the one Hebrew word shana, L'shanot, the verb from which shana comes, means on the one hand to repeat, mishneh, to do something a second time exactly as you did it before. It's not by chance that the rabbis originally called devarim mishneh Torah, meaning the repetition of the Torah, hence the Latin name Deuteronomy, which means the second law. But lishanot also means to change, to do something a second time, differently from the way you did it before. These two words are contraries, even contradictions in most languages. But in Hebrew, repetition and change are represented by the same word. What is new is old, and what is old is also new. In an age of vast inequalities of income within and between societies, in which more than 1 billion people lack adequate food and shelter, clean water and medical facilities, our parashah challenges us with its ideals. Wealth and power are not privileges, but responsibilities. Progressive Judaism summons us to become God's partner in building a world less random and capricious, more equitable and humane, a society more just and compassionate, a society of freedom and equality, of tolerance and dignity. May this be God's